All right, well, welcome everybody. You've made your way to the Mountain Midwest Hub webinar series. We've got Natalie Roberts-Day with us, and I will turn it over to her shortly. My name is Ellie Grapp. I am the Regional Training Director for the Hub here, and I use she, her pronouns. This Hub webinar series is really just dedicated to addressing a variety of different topics in kind of a bite-sized format. So by no means will you leave in half an hour as an expert, but we hope that it will spark some interest and get you thinking from a new perspective. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Natalie, who will get us kicked off for today. So thanks, Natalie, so much for being here.
All right, thank you guys. Hello and welcome. And a couple of things just to kind of let you know who I am. First of all, can everyone see and hear me okay? Everything looking good there? Great, good. Like Ellie said, my name is Natalie Roberts-Day. I have been one of the directors at YMCA Camp Kitaki, which is just outside of Lincoln, Nebraska, since 2008. And I worked there 6 years part-time before that. And so that's a little bit about my background. Prior to that, I worked at a domestic violence shelter running their children's program, as well as an after-school program in St. Paul, kind of working with a real diversity of youth with a lot of different needs in inner city St. Paul. And so that's just a little bit about me, a little bit about who I am and how I identify. I am a cisgendered white woman who is like middle-aged, married, has kids, things like that. And so in a lot of ways, I feel very unqualified to talk about this topic of kind of creating gender affirming spaces. But on the other hand, I think that I have a lot to say about creating gender affirming spaces, both from my background working at camps and also I was a gender studies major and sociology major in college, and I've used a lot of the things that I've learned kind of in that academic side of things and applied them in ways that I think I found a lot of success in our youth programs. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today, is just a little bit about kind of what we do at Kitaki and kind of what I think you guys can take away. But I would love to just really quickly have people drop into the chat what you are hoping to get out of today. So if you have anything where you're like, I have a specific question, a specific goal, we'll have time, like a Q&A time at the end. But if everyone can just drop in just a quick sentence of what you are hoping to get out of today, what brought you to today, just so I can make sure that I am catering our discussion time and what's going to make most sense for the people here. So I'll give you guys about 30 seconds to drop a comment in, and then I'm going to jump right in with things, but that will give me a sense of if I'm on the right track with things. So take about 20 more seconds. All right. And while you guys are finishing up kind of dropping those things in, I'm just going to talk a little bit about kind of why I think it's really important to create gender affirming programs. And I want to clarify that kind of when we're thinking about this, I think a lot of times, probably a lot of us are picturing, and in the chat, we can see a little bit of that, how do we create spaces for maybe like non-binary or transgender campers and staff and things like that. I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but I'm also going to talk about ways that we can just create environments that affirm all gender identities, because I think that sometimes when we try and break out into like this group sort of things, we act like that's like just impacting one particular group. But we have seen a lot of our efforts to create a more inclusive environment, maybe designed specifically for one group of kids, like transgender kids, for example, have really positive impacts on all of our programs and all of our program participants. So I'm going to start talking about why this is so important. And one of the biggest things is all of us are in youth development programs, which means we are all in the business of affirming identities. We are in the business of building up people's confidence and building up their self-esteem. And so we need to embrace our youth as their full selves in order to be achieving those goals. I talk a lot about at my camp, we have like nicknames for people. If they want a nickname, they can go by whatever nickname they want. We don't assign them, but sometimes kids want to be called meat meatball. And so if a kid comes to me and says, I want to be called meatball, I don't say, oh, let me check your health form and check your birth certificate to make sure that your parents understand that we're calling you meatball. I say, hey, meatball, welcome to camp, because we affirm identities of kids. And that's the same thing for pronouns and things like that, is just referring to kids in the ways that make sense and are respectful to them, is a part of what we do. Those are some examples of what that might look like specifically, but we are in that business of helping people feel like they can be their true and authentic selves in all of our programs, regardless of the identity of that camper, or that youth, or that staff member, as it might be. The other reason that I think it's really, really important to talk about these topics is we know that our LGBTQ plus campers and staff are at higher risk of suicide and self-harm and other very scary things because of being in environments where they are not embraced and where they don't feel like they can be their true selves. And so when we can create those safe environments, we can create the positive childhood experiences. You've probably heard of ACEs, like adverse childhood experiences, that have a negative effect on outcomes. Positive childhood experience, like being affirmed in your youth sports program or your camp or things like that, can have an insulating factor and can save lives for kids. And so we know that it's really important from that side of things to be creating these inclusive spaces. And then finally, it's part of our mission. It's our mission to be for all. And so we want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to help people feel a genuine sense of belonging in our programs. And like I kind of alluded to, not only does that mission help us when we are focused on a specific kid, but it helps us kind of generally with all of our families be better at helping create the spaces we want to see. So how do we create those spaces are some of the kind of things that you probably are wondering, like, how do we do that? One of the biggest ways that I think you can create a safe space for all gender identities is to just have normalize having conversations about gender. You know, what does it mean to be a girl today? Like, do you really think that girls can't play sports as well as boys? Do you really think that boys should never cry if they get hurt or if their feelings are hurt? And kind of normalizing those sorts of conversations in different ways to help just make it so that it's normal for people to understand that being a boy doesn't just mean one thing, or being a girl just doesn't mean one thing. That helps create an understanding of like, oh, well, you know, I use myself as an example. When I was a 9-year-old camper here at Kitaki, I got misgendered a lot, not because I'm transgendered, but because I've had short hair all my life. And when I was 9, I didn't have some of the other feminine presenting things that made me easily identifiable. And so things that we do at my camp now, like having people go around and share their pronouns, we always say like, hey, go around, share your name. If you're comfortable, share your pronouns, because we know that in some spaces people might not be comfortable yet, or might not feel comfortable in whatever space we're in for that reason. And then whatever, you know, like, and share your favorite tree or what kind of lizard you would be, you know, whatever kind of fun little question you have. Normalizing some of those conversations not only helps our transgender kids and staff, you know, help make sure that people know the right ways to refer to them, or for non-binary or gender fluid campers, helping make sure that they, you know, understand how they can introduce people so that they get the kind of respect that they need from being called by their name and pronouns that are the correct ones for them, are some examples of ways that we can help kind of normalize some of those conversations. One of the other big things that I think we can do in our youth programs to normalize conversations about gender that also minimize a lot of toxic behaviors and kind of like negativity that we don't want to see for all of our campers are things like not allowing negative stereotypes to be shouted when we're playing a sporting game. So, you know, like if you've ever set up a boys versus girls competition, which we don't do at my camp, we always do like pennies or roll up sleeves or get markers or something. We don't like to do like boys versus girls, because we know that as soon as we say boys versus girls, the girls are all going to start yelling, well, the boys are cheaters or whatever sort of things. And the boys are going to be like, the girls are slow, get them or whatever. And it creates a lot of adversity among our campers in ways that, number one, again, factually aren't true, and also create problems that we have to deal with because of these hurt feelings. So instead, teaching your staff to not set up those structures to begin with, which again, also to our point of kind of some of you mentioned non-binary campers or things like that, when you say, all right, boys versus girls, that leads to a point of tension for that camper of like, well, that doesn't fit. Like, I'm neither of those. So not having those sort of divisions in that way is helpful for that individual camper, but it also helps create that sort of environment where nobody feels like their gender is something that people are using to decide their abilities or their needs or whatever it might be. Going back to my notes really quickly. So that's one thing that I think is really important, is just having a culture that normalizes some of those conversations and interrupts things that are not healthy or not going to help kids understand what we want them to understand about gender, which is that it looks differently for everybody. Some boys have long hair, some girls have short hair. Being gender fluid, or like not having a sure like idea of like, today I'm this and then the next day I'm that. Those are things that maybe might feel like a little weird or different to us if we've never encountered them, but they're not wrong. They're just something that we need to explore. And so helping our staff kind of approach from that place of humble curiosity and asking lots of questions. We'll talk about that in a minute as well, but that's one of the ways that we can kind of normalize all of these conversations. Now, the next couple of things, those are kind of like culture and kind of creation sort of things that you can do within your programs to just be aware of what you are inviting in and how you are inviting people into your spaces. But the next couple of things that I'm going to talk about are kind of big things that I know people have worries on their minds for, like, parents are going to call me and be upset if these things, or what if my board sorts of things. And so I'm going to break down the things that I think are most important in creating those gender affirming spaces that also get like the board off your back and things like that for talking points. So the two big things that people call when parents call and are concerned about transgender inclusion, let's say at my camp, the two big things that are their like rational worries, I will say, when a parent will call, are safety and privacy. And luckily, we have really good things that we do to help address safety and privacy for all of our campers, so that when a parent calls me and says, I'm worried about this, I can say, great, we're worried about that too. Here's what we do, because we know that abuse is a concern for everyone, not regardless of any kind of gender identity. So these are the two big ones that your board probably wants you to have some talking points on. And that you will want to have ready to go, so that you can make sure that you feel confident in addressing things. Because while we do get very, very few, like we have a lot of openly transgender staff, we have non-binary staff. And so we have a lot of people who are very open, and same thing with campers at my camp, people who are very open about their gender identity. And we get very, very few angry parents and angry phone calls. Most parents are very, very supportive, but every now and again, someone will call and question what we're doing. And so these are kind of the main talking points that kind of help figure out what the concerns are for them. So usually I say, like, tell me what your concerns are. And first they'll bring up like, well, I don't want my kid like being stared at and being changing in front of people or things like that. And I say, that's great. We make sure that we have access to private changing areas for every one of our campers. And so regardless of your camper's identity, everyone's going to have private changing spaces. Now, my camp was not built with privacy in mind at all. Maybe some of you guys have like locker rooms that have like doors and things like that. That's awesome. My camp was built in the 50s. And so most of our shower houses have like, they used to be just big open showers, and we put up partitions and things, but we are not designed to be a facility that is accommodating in the ways that we want to be. And so some of the things that we've done to help with that in our facilities are things like, we bought a bunch of cheap pop-up tents. And so for any space that someone needs to change, where that access to privacy isn't readily available to them, we just have one of those pop-up tents that we can have in that space. And so things like that help a lot of those sort of concerns that people have about like, well, what if someone is changing out in the open or whatever. That's like the thing that can help with that what if. The other side of that is that camper, like, I talk about kind of the board side of things, but that's really not our main concern. That's just something that I know people have in their minds. But our main concern is this camper who's coming to us, who is probably very worried about being outed while they are changing or whatever might happen. And so having those access to private changing spaces is really important for that camper. Now, in the world of things that help before we were thinking about transgender inclusion, we didn't have these pop-up tents, which meant lots of kids had to change out in the open, and they weren't comfortable with that. But we were like, tough luck, too bad. We don't have private changing spaces, so just go change in your sleeping bag or whatever it might be. And now that we have that, we have had lots of increased camper satisfaction surveys on things like our facilities, because everybody is more comfortable and has the spaces they need to change. And so when you make some of those little changes, that can make a big difference. Some of the other things in the world of kind of little changes that make a big difference in signaling that you are a safe space for kids and staff who maybe are LGBTQ plus. But one of the other things that you can do is little things like having trash cans in the bathrooms of male identifying bathrooms, so that if you are a menstruator and you use the male bathrooms, then you have access to a place where you can throw away your menstrual products. But the other thing that is great with that, when we put those tiny trash cans in, all of a sudden, all of our kids who have a significant medical need had a place where they can privately throw away, the bag for their colonoscopy or whatever sort of thing it might be. So there's a lot of different little things that you can do when you start to make little changes to be more affirming that can help in all of these different ways. But we didn't know to put the tiny trash cans in. Like, that wasn't my idea. I hadn't thought about that as a facility need until we had individual conversations with the campers and staff who are coming to us. And so as you think about, there's the kind of structural side of how do you create an affirming space? How do you train your staff, making sure your staff have easy and simple language to explain what it means to be transgender. Sometimes people are born and the doctor makes a best guess at what gender they are. And then as they get older and they can talk, they can tell people, actually, this is right for me. And giving them some kind of little script for that so that they can know what kind of language to use if a kid asks or things, are all ways that you can help support your staff in having the language and tools to be creating the safe space. And then once you've created that safe space, inviting campers and staff to share their needs through that humble curiosity, we're so excited to welcome you to camp. We know that there's going to be times where we need to change clothes. Here's what our facilities look like. What questions do you have about that? What ideas do you have to make sure that this is comfortable for you? Those are the sorts of things that we started to ask. I just had a conversation with a staff member who was like, we have some cabins where the private changing area is a bathroom and there's no hooks. Can we throw some hooks up so that your stuff isn't just sitting on the bathroom floor when you're changing? And so having those little conversations with everybody in your staff world and in your camper world to figure out what are your needs and how can we best address them. And that's especially important if you are like me and you have a binary program set up and you have campers who maybe are non-binary. But just in general, having that conversation with that youth or with that youth and family, if that family is supportive, to help make sure that we are addressing and meeting their needs. And then, so we talked a little bit about privacy. The other thing people are often very worried about is just abuse prevention. And so recognizing that we are worried about abuse prevention broadly and not specific to any individual identity. We know that abuse can happen in peer-to-peer situations. We know that it happens across all demographics and dimensions of diversity. And so having good talking points about what you do to prevent abuse situations. So at our camp, we very strictly follow the rule of 3, and we make sure that everyone knows that. And so there is never any one-on-one time. Things like that are some of the ways that you can help make sure that you are ready to address some of the different things that might come up with people. I had a few more things, but I think that I'm going to pause for now. And I know that we just have very limited time, and I want to be able to make sure that I am answering the questions that you guys have that best meet your needs. So I'm going to pause here and turn it over to Ellie, who will kind of facilitate a Q&A for us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Natalie. I think that's a lot of amazing ideas and things that I'm sure we'll have some questions on. I'm going to stop the recording so that we can all ask questions freely. And give me 1 second to do that.